The Castle by Franz Kafka. Chapter 12. I am your narrator. Next morning, nobody awoke until the schoolchildren were standing there with gaping eyes round the sleepers. This was unpleasant, for on account of the intense heat, which now towards morning had given way, however, to a coldness which could be felt. They had all taken off everything but their shirts, and just as they were beginning to put their clothes on, Giza, the lady teacher, appeared at the door. A fair, tall, beautiful, but somewhat stiff young woman. She was evidently prepared for the new janitor, and seemed also to have been given her instructions by the teacher. For as soon as she appeared at the door, she began, "I can't put up with this. This is a fine state of affairs. You have permission to sleep in the classroom, but that's all. I am not obliged to teach in your bedroom. A janitor's family that loll in their beds far into the forenoon. Faugh! Well, something might be said about that, particularly as far as the family and the beds were concerned," thought Kay. While with Frida's help, the assistants were of no use. Lying on the floor, they looked in amazement at the lady teacher and the children. He dragged across the parallel bars and the vaulting horse, threw the blanket over them, and so constructed a little room in which one could at least get on one's clothes protected from the children's gaze. He was not given a minute's peace, however, for the lady teacher began to scold because there was no fresh water in the washing basin. Kay had just been thinking of fetching the basin for himself and Frida to wash in, but he had at once given up on the idea so as not to exasperate the lady teacher too much. But his renunciation was of no avail, for immediately afterwards there was a loud crash. Unfortunately, it seemed they had forgotten to clear away the remains of the supper from the teacher's table, so she sent it all flying with her ruler, and everything fell on the floor. She didn't need to bother about the sardine oil and the remainder of the coffee being spilt, and the coffee pot smashed to pieces. The janitor, of course, could soon clear that up. Clothed once more, Kay and Frida, leaning on the parallel bars, witnessed the destruction of their few things. The assistants, who had obviously never thought of putting on their clothes, had stuck their heads through a fold of the blankets near the floor, to the great delight of the children. What grieved Frida most was naturally the loss of the coffee pot. Only when Kay, to comfort her, assured her that he would go immediately to the village superintendent and demand that it be replaced, and see that this was done, was she able to gather herself together sufficiently to run out of their stockade in her chemise and skirt, and rescue the table cover at least from being stained any more. And she managed it, though the lady teacher, to frighten her, kept on hammering on the table with the ruler in the most nerve-wracking fashion. When When Kay and Frida were quite clothed, they had to compel the assistants, who seemed to be struck dumb by those events, to get their clothes on as well, had not merely to order them and push them, indeed, but to actually put some of their clothes on for them. Then, when all was ready, Care shared out the remaining work. The assistants were to bring in wood and light the fire, but in the other classroom first, from which another and greater danger threatened, for the teacher himself was probably already there. Frida was to scrub the floor, and Kay would fetch fresh water and set things to rights generally. For the time being, breakfast could not be thought of. But so as to find out definitively the attitude of the lady teacher, Kay decided to issue from their shelter himself first. The others were only to follow when he called them. He adopted this policy on the one hand because he did not want the position to be compromised in advance by any stupid act of the assistants, and on the other because he wanted Frida to be spared as much as possible, for she had ambitions and he had none. She was sensitive and he was not. She only thought of the petty discomforts of the moment, while he was thinking of Barnabas and the future. Frida followed all his instructions implicitly and scarcely took her eyes from him. Hardly had he appeared when the lady teacher cried amid the laughter of the children, which from now on never stopped, "Slept well?" And as Kay paid no attention, seeing that after all it was not a real question, but began to clear up the washstand, she asked, "What have you been doing to my cat?" A huge, fat old cat was lying lazily outstretched on the table, and the teacher was examining one of its paws, which was evidently a little hurt. So Frida had been right after all. This cat had not, of course, leapt on her, for it was past the leaping stage, but it had crawled over her, had been terrified by the presence of people in the empty house, had concealed itself hastily, and in its unaccustomed hurry had hurt itself. Kay tried to explain this quietly to the teacher, but the only thing she had eyes for was the injury itself, and she replied, "Well then, it's your fault through coming here. Just look at this." And she called Kay over to the table, showed him the paw, and before he could get a proper look at it, gave him a whack with the torse over the back of his hand. The tails of the torse were blunted. It was true, but this time, without any regard for the cat, she had brought them down so sharply that they raised bloody veals. "And now, go about your business," she said impatiently, bowing herself once more over the cat. Frida, who had been looking on with the assistants from behind the parallel bars, cried out when she saw the blood. Kay held up his hand in front of the children and said, "Look, that's what a sly, wicked cat has done to me." He said it, indeed, not for the children's benefit, whose shouting and laughter had become continuous, so that it needed no further occasion or incitement, and could not be pierced or influenced by any words of his. But seeing that the lady teacher, too, only acknowledged the insult by a brief side glance and remained still occupied with the cat, her first fury satiated by the drawing of blood, Kay called Frida and the assistants, and the work began.